It was November 2016 when a hunter named Dale Kruger pushed deeper into Michigan's Huron National Forest than he had in years. He wasn't looking for anything unusual, just a deer he had wounded hours earlier. But as the daylight faded, he stepped into a place few had ever seen. At the bottom of a narrow valley, hidden from any trail or overlook, two tents stood. Their colors had long since faded to the gray-green of the moss and pine needles that covered them. Saplings had rooted through their bases. The forest was reclaiming them. Hunters stumble on abandoned camps now and then. But this was different. The fire ring was still intact, stones arranged in a careful circle. A pair of boots sat by the flap of one tent as if someone had stepped out and never returned. And inside, time seemed frozen. Sleeping bags rolled, a cracked camera, and a worn purple journal scattered across the floor. Dale felt the weight of the silence. It wasn't the silence of wilderness. It was the silence of something gone terribly wrong. He backed out slowly, his mind racing with the thought that he had just found evidence from a case he'd only ever heard whispers about. 5 years earlier, in 2011, 5 college students had vanished on a weekend camping trip in these same woods. Their car was found abandoned. Their phones, wallets, and IDs left behind. Search teams scoured hundreds of miles with dogs, helicopters, and volunteers. Not a single clue was found. Until now. The hunter marked the coordinates and left the valley before nightfall. Days later, detectives returned with cameras and evidence bags. And what they uncovered inside those 2 tents, their belongings, their notes, and their final messages, would finally break the silence of the forest and reveal a truth far darker and more heartbreaking than anyone had imagined. On Friday afternoon, October 14, 2011, 5 college students loaded themselves and their camping gear into a beat-up Honda Pilot. It was supposed to be simple. 2 nights under the stars in Michigan's Huron National Forest, back on campus by Sunday evening, classes on Monday morning. No one imagined this weekend would become the last time anyone ever saw them alive. Garrett Sullivan was at the wheel. 22, a senior from Detroit. He had the kind of easy laugh that carried across a room. He lived for photography, always chasing the next perfect shot, always dangling from a ledge or climbing a ridge with his camera strapped across his chest. His girlfriend, Zoe Blackwood, sat in the passenger seat. Zoe was quieter, an art major with paint still smudged under her nails and sketchbooks always spilling out of her bag. She didn't love the wilderness the way Garrett did, but she loved him enough to follow. In the back sat 3 of their closest friends. Camden Torres, jittery with nervous energy, spoke a mile a minute about med school applications and exam prep. His loyalty to the group was unmatched. If someone needed help at 3 a.m., Camden was the one who showed up. Next to him was Iris Novak, a journalism major with sharp green eyes and a camera of her own, though hers captured words as much as images. She was the storyteller of the group, documenting every trip, every inside joke, every unforgettable night. And finally, there was Beckett Hayes, nicknamed Bear for his obsession with survival shows. A computer science student, Beckett was the kind who could fix anything with duct tape and a little stubbornness. They were a tight circle, the kind of friends who had spent late nights studying together, laughing in dorm lounges, and promising that life wouldn't pull them apart after graduation. This trip was meant to be one last memory before adulthood pulled them in different directions. At a gas station in Grayling, the last stop before the wilderness, the group stocked up on snacks and fuel. Security footage later showed them laughing, joking, bumping shoulders as they carried bags of chips and sodas back to the car. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. Nothing about them looked unusual. Nothing suggested that within 48 hours, they would vanish. The last trace came minutes later, when Iris posted a photo to Instagram. A row of towering pines stretched into the sky, captioned simply, "Into the wild we go." At 4:17 p.m., that single sentence marked the beginning of their silence. Back on campus, Maya Chen watched the post pop up on her feed. Maya had been their 6th wheel, often joining on road trips and late-night study marathons. But this time, she'd stayed behind to prepare for a midterm. "Come with us," Garrett had urged. She shook her head. Organic chemistry waits for no one. At the time, it seemed like the responsible choice. Later, it would feel like a curse. That Friday night passed uneventfully. By Saturday morning, Maya noticed no texts, no calls, but brushed it off. Cell service in the forest was spotty. By Sunday evening, though, the unease grew. She expected Facebook photos by then. At least a few sarcastic texts from Camden about sore muscles or Zoe complaining about bugs. Instead, there was only silence. By Monday morning, the silence had become deafening. None of the 5 appeared in class. Professors took attendance, found empty chairs, and exchanged concerned looks. Maya tried their phones again, straight to voicemail. Friends began asking each other if anyone had heard from them. The answer was always no. By Monday afternoon, the worry had turned to fear. Roommates called parents, parents called police. And within 24 hours, what began as a carefree weekend camping trip had already begun to unravel into one of Michigan's most disturbing mysteries. Cliffhanger. By Monday night, the group's car was found sitting at the edge of the forest, doors unlocked, keys in the ignition, their phones and wallets stacked neatly inside. But of the 5 students themselves, there was no sign. By Monday morning, October 17th, the quiet unease that had been tugging at Maya Chen hardened into full panic. She had sent message after message, each one swallowed by silence. "You guys back yet?" No response. "Call me when you get service." Still nothing. When she tried their numbers directly, each rang once, then clicked into voicemail. Maya wasn't alone. Zoe's roommate grew nervous when Zoe didn't return to the dorm Sunday night. Camden's MCT study partner complained that he'd missed their scheduled session, unthinkable for someone usually so punctual. Professors began marking absences, some noting it as unusual for diligent students who rarely skipped class. By noon, the concern had spread from whispers in hallways to frantic calls across campus. Maya's anxiety turned physical. Her stomach twisted each time she checked her phone. She had convinced herself all weekend that spotty service explained the silence. But now, surrounded by classmates who also hadn't heard a word, she knew something was wrong. It wasn't just bad reception, it was absence. By mid-afternoon, parents were being called. Zoe's mother, a nurse working a double shift in Detroit, left voicemails that went unanswered. Garrett's father tried texting his son, only to see the message remain unread. Camden's cousins reached out on Facebook, asking if anyone had seen him, and Iris's parents, both journalists by trade, knew immediately that this was no simple misunderstanding. By late afternoon, Garrett's parents made the drive north from Detroit. They arrived on campus pale and frantic, gathering details from Maya and Zoe's roommate before deciding to call authorities. That evening, the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department officially opened a missing persons case. From the start, police took the report seriously. It wasn't one student failing to check in. It was 5 responsible young adults, all gone without explanation, and all had disappeared at the same time on the same trip. Detective Sarah Whitmore, a seasoned investigator with the Michigan State Police, quickly took charge. She was methodical, with a reputation for keeping calm when others panicked. But even she admitted that 5 missing people at once was highly unusual and deeply troubling. Officers began piecing together a timeline. They confirmed the group's last known sighting at a Grayling gas station Friday afternoon. They noted Iris's Instagram post at 4:17 p.m., showing those tall pines and the words, "Into the wild we go." After that, nothing. On Tuesday morning, search efforts expanded. Deputies canvassed the highway routes, stopping at trailheads and campgrounds. They showed photos of the 5 students to clerks and rangers. Some remembered seeing them. Most did not. Then came the first breakthrough. Just 15 miles northeast of Grayling, a deputy spotted Garrett's old Honda Pilot at the edge of a popular trailhead. The vehicle was parked neatly, as if its occupants intended to return soon. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside, investigators found a small, chilling detail. 5 cell phones stacked together on the dashboard, along with wallets and IDs. It looked deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though the group had made a conscious decision to shed their links to the outside world before entering the forest. But if that was true, why? And why hadn't they come back? The gray Honda Pilot sat quietly at the edge of the trailhead. Dew collected on its hood, fallen leaves scattered across the windshield. At first glance, it looked like any other car left behind by weekend hikers. But when detectives peered through the windows, unease spread quickly. The keys dangled from the ignition. On the dashboard, in plain sight, lay 5 cell phones, neatly stacked. Next to them were wallets, driver's licenses, and even a credit card or two. It was the kind of detail investigators rarely see. Lost hikers usually take their phones, even in areas with spotty reception. They carry them for photos or as clocks. But here, it was as if the group had intentionally severed themselves from the outside world. Detective Sarah Whitmore ran her fingers along the dusty hood. Unlocked, she muttered. No forced entry. No sign of a struggle. Inside, nothing appeared ransacked. Backpacks and food supplies were missing, but that only confirmed the group had left on foot. To law enforcement, it raised 2 possibilities. Either the friends had walked into the forest willingly, expecting a normal trip, or they had planned something far stranger. By Wednesday morning, October 19th, the search began in earnest. The Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department coordinated with state police, volunteer search and rescue teams, and local rangers. Dozens of people gathered at the trailhead. Some carried maps and radios. Others simply showed up with boots and flashlights, determined to help. Search dogs were brought in first. At the edge of the parking lot, handlers let the hounds sniff clothing retrieved from the car. The dogs whined, pulled against their leashes, and then darted into the tree line with sudden urgency. For a moment, hope surged. Their noses had caught something. Teams followed as the dogs wove along the path, veering off into thick brush. Branches snapped underfoot, brambles clawed at jackets. But then, inexplicably, the trail ended. Within a few hundred yards, the dogs circled, confused, as if the scent had simply evaporated. Handlers tried again, starting from the vehicle. Each time, the trail began strong, and then vanished. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their thermal imaging cameras sweeping the dense canopy. From above, the Huron National Forest stretched like an endless carpet of green, ridges, valleys, streams cutting through shadow. Searches on the ground waved, coordinated by radio. But no warm signatures appeared beneath the trees. By the second day, more volunteers arrived, college classmates, professors, neighbors. They spread out in grid patterns, combing miles of trail. Some shouted the missing students' names until their voices cracked. Others pinned fluorescent tape to branches to mark their progress. At night, camp lanterns flickered like stars scattered across the forest floor as teams regrouped and planned the next sweep. But the forest gave nothing back. Each hour without a discovery only deepened the mystery. Investigators found no discarded food wrappers, no clothing, no fire sites beyond the parking lot. Experienced trackers noted the absence of footprints, as if the group had floated over the soil rather than walked upon it. Detective Whitmore grew increasingly frustrated. She had worked dozens of missing person cases, but this one carried a chilling emptiness. 5 people couldn't just vanish, not without leaving something behind. Yet every direction they searched, the woods swallowed their efforts. Theories began to swirl among the volunteers. Some muttered about the possibility of foul play, though no sign of violence existed in the car. Others wondered if the students had intentionally staged their disappearance, though abandoning IDs and phones made little sense. A darker whisper crept through the ranks. Maybe the forest itself had taken them. By the end of the week, the search radius extended to over 20 square miles. Teams trudged through swamps, descended ravines, and marked off clearings. Helicopters returned day after day, burning thousands of dollars in fuel. Yet the result remained the same: silence. One rescuer described it best. It was like chasing ghosts. You could feel them in the trees, but they were never there. To understand how 5 young people could walk into the woods and never walk out, you have to understand the place they entered. The Huron National Forest is not the kind of wilderness most weekend campers imagine. Sprawling across nearly 1 million acres of northern Michigan, it is a land shaped by glaciers, rivers, and storms. Beauty and danger grow side by side here, and anyone who underestimates it quickly learns how unforgiving it can be. From above, it looks like a vast green quilt, miles of pine, oak, and maple stitched together by narrow streams and shadowed valleys. But inside, the forest is a maze. Ancient ridges rise suddenly, blocking sightlines. Valleys dip low, filling with mist that lingers long after sunrise. The canopy often swallows the sky, leaving travelers without sun or stars to guide them. Beneath the trees, the ground itself is treacherous. Fallen logs crisscross trails, hiding sinkholes and pockets of soft earth. Seasonal wetlands appear without warning. What looks like solid ground can, in a single step, collapse into knee-deep muck. More than one rescuer had to be pulled free by teammates when the mud locked around their boots like cement. Technology offered little help. GPS devices flickered and failed in natural dead zones. Radios crackled with static, voices dropping out mid-sentence. Even cell phones, powerful in cities, went mute under the dense canopy. The forest swallowed sound and signal alike, creating an isolation that felt almost deliberate. For rescuers, every step was a battle. Volunteers grew exhausted, their bright vests dulled with mud and sweat. Helicopter crews scanned from above, but the thick canopy revealed almost nothing beneath. Dogs tired quickly, their trails dissolving into the forest floor. After days, then weeks, the obstacles began to take their toll. The families saw it firsthand. Many joined the searches, walking the same paths where their children might have gone. Garrett's father wore blisters into his feet, still refusing to stop. Zoe's mother trudged through rain and swamp water, calling her daughter's name into the indifferent trees. Camden's uncles arrived in caravans, spreading out across ridges with flashlights and hunting knives, determined to bring him back. Each effort ended the same way: frustration, exhaustion, silence. The forest gave no clues, no scraps of fabric caught on branches, no signs of campfires or shelter. It was as though the 5 friends had been lifted out of the world, leaving nothing behind. By the end of the first month, searches had officially covered over 200 square miles. They had marked trails with tape, climbed rocky outcrops, even lowered themselves into ravines deep enough to hide small buildings. They found deer carcasses, abandoned hunting blinds, and rusted trucks long forgotten by time. But of Garrett, Zoe, Camden, Iris, and Beckett, nothing. One rescuer described it later. It was like the forest decided to erase them. Every path we followed ended in silence. For the families, the search was never just about statistics or square miles. It was about faces, 5 young lives that had been the center of their worlds. And as the weeks turned into months, anguish became the only constant. Garrett Sullivan's parents were the kind who had always lived paycheck to paycheck, working as teachers in Detroit. They had never been wealthy, but they had been proud of Garrett's photographs, proud of his future. When the official search slowed, they refused to accept it. They drained savings accounts, hired private investigators, and even turned to psychics in their desperation. On weekends, they drove back to the forest with Garrett's younger brother, calling his name into the trees until their voices gave out. Zoe Blackwood's mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to pay her daughter's tuition. When Zoe vanished, her grief manifested as relentless searching. She took a leave of absence from work that eventually stretched into permanent disability. Depression pressed down like a weight she couldn't lift. Still, she drove to the forest every October, leaving flowers at the trailhead as if Zoe might see them if she returned. Camden Torres' family was large, with cousins, uncles, and siblings scattered across the Midwest. They organized their own search parties, sometimes bringing dozens of relatives to cover ground the official teams had missed. Camden's father, a quiet man by nature, grew gaunt from sleepless nights. His mother carried a rosary everywhere, whispering prayers she never seemed to finish. Iris Novak's parents were both journalists. For them, searching meant fighting with words. They kept the case in the headlines, appearing on talk shows, lobbying networks, even publishing a book about their daughter's disappearance. The proceeds went to missing person organizations, a way of turning grief into action. Yet every interview carried the same hollowness. Their daughter was still gone. Beckett Hayes's family took the opposite path. He had been their only child, their pride. Losing him left them fractured. Neighbors recalled how his father stopped answering the door, how his mother pulled the curtains shut and rarely spoke. Within 2 years, the family sold their house and moved away from Michigan entirely, as though putting distance between themselves and the forest could quiet the pain. And then there was Maya Chen, the sixth friend, the one who stayed behind to study. Survivor's guilt wrapped around her like chains. Every time she looked at her textbooks, she saw their faces. She thought of the invitation she had turned down and wondered if her presence might have changed the outcome. The guilt reshaped her life. She abandoned her chemistry major and switched to criminal justice. If she couldn't save her friends, she told herself, maybe she could prevent someone else's disappearance. She graduated with honors, but never with peace. The absence gnawed at everyone in different ways. Some clung to hope, others sank into despair, but all shared the same torment. They couldn't grieve. No bodies, no funerals, no graves to visit. Just silence. Experts call it ambiguous loss, a wound that never closes because the mind can't accept what the heart knows. By the spring of 2012, the Michigan State Police made the agonizing announcement the families dreaded most. The official search was being suspended. Winter weather had made conditions dangerous, resources were strained, and after 4 months, no new evidence had been uncovered. Detective Sarah Whitmore stood before the families with the words no one wanted to hear. "We have done everything we can." Her eyes lingered on the photos taped to the command post wall. 5 young faces frozen in time, smiling at cameras they would never see again. At first, the disappearance of 5 college students was impossible to ignore. Local stations ran nightly updates, their anchors repeating the same grim facts. A car left at a trailhead, 5 phones and wallets abandoned, no trace of the friends themselves. Parents appeared on camera, their voices trembling as they begged the public for help. Flyers with smiling faces and bold letters, "Missing," were pinned to grocery store bulletin boards and campus notice walls. National media soon followed. Networks sent crews to Michigan, panning wide shots of the endless green forest that seemed to have swallowed the group whole. The story fit neatly into America's collective unease with wilderness. Vast spaces where rules failed, where people vanished and explanations ran dry. Speculation thrived. True crime podcasts dissected the timeline, suggesting everything from foul play to ritualistic abduction. Some focused on the odd detail of the phones and IDs stacked neatly inside the vehicle. Was it a sign of intention, a symbolic gesture, or evidence that someone else had forced them to leave it behind? On internet forums, theories took a darker turn. Some insisted a cult had lured the group into the woods, pointing to unconfirmed reports of strange camps and bonfires in northern Michigan. Others whispered about UFOs, seizing on the sudden disappearance of 5 healthy young adults as proof of something beyond human explanation. One popular podcast episode was titled, "The Huron 5, Taken or Lost." Its closing question: if it was the forest, why didn't the forest leave a trace? But as months passed and seasons turned, the noise began to fade. Winter brought new headlines, new tragedies. Another missing person case in another state pushed the Huron 5 off the front page. By spring, only the families still lived with the mystery every day. The flyers curled at the edges, their colors fading under rain and sun. The university, once shaken, returned to its normal rhythm of exams, football games, and homecoming weekends. For most, the missing students became just another cautionary tale, something to mention around campfires or in lectures about safety. For the families, silence was worse than any rumor. Each unverified sighting proved false. Each anonymous tip led nowhere. The case files grew thicker with dead ends, but never with answers. Detectives rotated to new assignments, resources shifted elsewhere. Still, the grief never loosened. Garrett's parents kept his room exactly as he had left it, camera lenses still on the desk. Zoe's mother continued to pay her daughter's phone bill, unable to disconnect the number. Camden's family held a memorial service without a body to bury. Iris's parents launched a website that dwindled in traffic after the first year, and Beckett's family slipped into seclusion, their absence as heavy as their son's. By 2014, Detective Sarah Whitmore retired. Her final note in the file captured her frustration. Either the most perfectly executed crime in Michigan history, or the most tragic accident. But without evidence, I cannot determine which. The Huron Five faded from the public eye, replaced by newer mysteries and louder stories. But for those who had known them, the wound remained open, a constant reminder of how fragile presence could be. 5 years had passed since the disappearance. 5 long years of silence. For most of the public, the case was already a faded memory. But the forest had not finished with its secret. On a cold November morning in 2016, a 58-year-old machinist named Dale Kruger rose before dawn, as he had done hundreds of times before. For over 3 decades, he had hunted deer in the Huron National Forest. He was not a man given to imagination. His world was precision and patience, machines and routines. The forest, to him, was predictable, a place that rewarded discipline. That day, he followed the blood trail of an 8-point buck he had wounded earlier. It led him deeper into the woods than usual. The terrain grew harsher, deadfall blocking his path, ridges forcing detours, the canopy closing until the sky was little more than a thin gray ribbon above. Still, he pressed on, confident in his skill. Hours later, Dale realized he had wandered into unfamiliar territory. Ahead, the land dipped sharply into a narrow depression, almost invisible until he was standing on its edge. The valley floor lay below, carpeted in pine needles, its silence heavy and unnatural. He hesitated before descending, unsettled by the eerie stillness. No bird calls, no rustling squirrels, not even the whisper of wind. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then he saw them, 2 tents, side by side in the clearing. At first glance, they seemed like shadows, shapes half blended into the earth. Their colors had long since faded, one once blue, now a dull green-gray, the other a washed-out red bleached nearly white. Saplings had grown through their fabric, roots pushing up through collapsed seams. Nature had already begun pulling them back into the soil. Hunters sometimes stumbled across abandoned camps. People left gear behind, storms scattered equipment. But this was different. These weren't careless scraps. They were intact, deliberate. Between the tents lay a circle of stones, the remnants of a fire pit buried under years of needles and rot. Ropes still tied to branches sagged with moss, their knots surprisingly firm. Cautiously, Dale approached. His boots sank softly into the valley floor. Each step seemed louder than it should, the silence amplifying every sound. At the first tent, he crouched and peered inside. The smell of damp nylon and decay greeted him. Sleeping bags were still rolled against the walls. A pair of boots sat neatly by the entrance, and in the dim light, a cracked digital camera lay half hidden beneath leaves. Nearby, a notebook with a faded purple cover rested where it had been dropped, pages warped by years of moisture. Dale's pulse quickened. He didn't need a news report to know what he had found. The hairs on the back of his neck rose as recognition set in. This was no ordinary campsite. These were the remains of the missing student skier, the Huron 5. Every instinct told him to leave. The silence pressed harder, as though the valley resented his intrusion. But his training as a hunter kept him steady. He pulled out his GPS unit and carefully marked the coordinates. He noted landmarks, tracing the difficult path back in his mind. Then, without disturbing another item, he backed away. By the time Dale reached his truck hours later, the sun was already low, shadows stretching across the ridges. He sat in the cab for a long time, staring at the coordinates scrawled on a scrap of paper. His hands trembled. He was not a man prone to fear, but what he had seen in that valley unsettled him in a way few things ever had. The next morning, he walked into the Michigan State Police post in Grayling. At the desk, he told the young trooper on duty that he had found something in the woods, something that might be connected to the case everyone thought was long dead. Detective Marcus Reed had studied the cold case files for months, poring over maps, timelines, and interviews that always seemed to circle back to the same dead end. When the call came from Grayling, that a hunter had stumbled upon 2 abandoned tents deep in the forest, he felt a flicker of hope he'd trained himself not to trust. Too many false leads. Too many discoveries that turned out to be nothing. But something in the hunter's voice, steady and reluctant, convinced him this time might be different. 4 days after Dale Kruger's report, Reed led a small team into the Huron National Forest. The hike was punishing. Ridges to climb, thick brush to cut through, and ground that swallowed boots into muck. The hunter guided them, his memory of the path cleared despite its difficulty. Hours later, they descended into the same valley he had described, and there it was, just as he'd said. 2 tents, weathered and broken, sitting like ghosts in the shadows. Reed raised a hand. Nobody touches anything until it's documented. The crime scene technician moved first, unpacking cameras and evidence markers. They photographed every angle. The sagging ropes still tied to branches, the collapsed red tent, the blue one with fabric torn and faded. Even the fire ring of stones was documented, ash and charcoal still visible beneath years of leaves. When Reed finally stepped to the first tent, he crouched low, the beam of his flashlight cutting into the gloom. The sight inside made his chest tighten. Sleeping bags, still in their stuffed sacks, lined the edges. A pair of women's boots, size 7, rested neatly by the entrance, laces undone as if their owner had just stepped out. Near the center, a small camp stove sat beside a rusted fuel canister. Scattered on the nylon floor lay objects unmistakably personal. A University of Michigan sweatshirt, its logo still visible despite fading. A cracked digital camera, and a notebook with a purple cover, its pages swollen with damp. Reed reached for the notebook with gloved hands. The first page bore handwriting in loopy purple ink, smudged but legible. Day 3. We are still lost. Trying to ration supplies. The name Iris Novak was signed on the inside cover. The air in the tent seemed to grow heavier. This wasn't just debris. This was their camp, their final refuge. The second tent yielded even more. Inside, Reed's flashlight fell across a backpack with a luggage tag, Camden Torres neatly written in black marker. Next to it, a prescription pill bottle still labeled Iris Novak, October 2011. A paperback novel bore the name Beckett Hayes scribbled inside the cover. Each item was like a voice speaking out of silence, telling investigators what the forest had concealed for 5 years. But there was one object that drew every eye. A small black video camera, its plastic body scratched but intact. The memory card was still in place. Reed lifted it carefully, his gloves slick against the damp casing. Cameras had been found before in wilderness cases, but rarely intact after so many years. This one might contain the last images of the missing students. The team worked methodically, cataloging everything. Evidence bags filled with journals, clothes, scraps of food wrappers buried nearby. They even noted a makeshift latrine behind a boulder, proof that the group had survived here for more than a night or two. Still, something gnawed at Reed. For all the belongings, there were no remains, no bones, no sign of violence. It was as if the students had simply walked away, leaving their world frozen in time. As the team packed up, Reed held the video camera in his hands a moment longer. Its weight felt symbolic, like the key to 5 years of unanswered questions. He imagined what might be on it. Laughter around a fire, or something far darker. That night, back at the lab, technicians powered it up. The screen flickered, battered but functional. File names appeared, photos, clips, each time-stamped October 2011. When technicians scrolled through the recovered memory card, the early photos were ordinary enough. Snapshots of the forest, smiles around a campfire, Zoe sketching on a log while Garrett adjusted his camera tripod. But as the files moved forward, the tone shifted. Faces grew gaunt, eyes hollowed. What had begun as a carefree trip had descended into something much darker. The journal told a story first. In Iris Novak's neat purple ink, the entries began optimistically. Day 1. Set up camp in a small valley. Garrett says it's perfect. Spirits are high. By day 3, her words had changed. We tried to find the trail again, but we're completely turned around. Camden twisted his ankle badly climbing down a ridge. Garrett says it might be broken. We're rationing food. Day 6. We've been walking in circles. The GPS won't hold signal. No one wants to say it, but we're lost. Garrett keeps photographing everything, as if that will keep us calm. Zoe cries at night when she thinks no one hears. Then day 10. Camden can't walk. We've splinted his leg with tent poles and duct tape, but it isn't enough. Supplies are almost gone. We tried to catch fish in the stream but failed. Beckett suggested leaving most of the gear behind so we can move faster. But the forest feels endless. We can't find our way back. The final entry, dated October 21st, was brief and shaky. We are going to try tomorrow. Carry Camden out. If we don't make it, at least we'll be together. But it was the video that broke investigators' composure. The footage was shaky, Iris's hand trembling as she held the camera in the dim light of the tent. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. It's been 12 days, she said. We can't find our way back. Camden's leg is worse. He can't move. We're almost out of food. If anyone finds this, tell our families we tried. The camera tilted to show the others. Garrett sat close, his once bright energy drained into a hollow stare. Zoe's face was pale, streaked with tears. Beckett forced a smile at the lens, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. In the background, Camden lay on his side, his right leg bound with makeshift splints. His voice was faint. We just want to go home. The video cut in and out, static biting at the edges. Another clip followed, short, fragmented. The group huddled around the fire pit, flames low, speaking in whispers. Garrett's voice. Tomorrow, we carry him. We can't wait any longer. Iris's last words into the lens. If you see this, we tried. And then, nothing. No footage of their attempt to leave. No images of what happened next. Just silence after October 21st, 2011. Detective Reed watched the final clip 3 times before he set the camera down. The evidence gave answers, but not closure. The students had been alive for nearly 2 weeks, trapped by injury, lost in the wilderness, fighting to survive. Their plan to carry Camden out had likely been their final act of courage, but the forest never returned them. The footage confirmed what many suspected. It hadn't been foul play or cults or aliens. It had been the unforgiving indifference of the wilderness. The discovery of the campsite changed everything and nothing. For the first time in 5 years, investigators finally had answers. Yet the most important pieces were still missing. No human remains were ever recovered. Despite extensive searches around the valley, not a single bone, tooth, or scrap of clothing was found beyond the tents. Wildlife experts explained that in such terrain, remains could vanish quickly. Scavengers, harsh winters, and years of decay would scatter evidence until the forest reclaimed it completely. By 2016, nature had already erased nearly all trace of 5 young lives. Still, the evidence spoke loudly. Experts reviewed the journals, the makeshift splints, the carefully rationed food scraps, the latrine dug behind the boulder. To them, the picture was tragically clear. The Huron 5 had been trapped by circumstance, not conspiracy. An injury immobilized one, and loyalty kept the others from abandoning him. They rationed, endured, and finally attempted to escape together. Somewhere beyond the valley, the wilderness consumed them. Detective Reed, who had inherited the case years after it went cold, described it with quiet conviction. This was not crime. This was survival. And the wilderness won. For the families, the discovery brought a kind of closure, though it was far from peace. Garrett's parents wept when shown his recovered camera and journal. They kept his photos close, proud that even in his final days he had continued to document the world around him. Zoe's mother clutched her daughter's sketchbook, pages warped with damp, the drawings smudged but still hers. Camden's relatives found solace in knowing his friends hadn't left him behind. Iris's parents saw their daughter's words not as despair, but as courage. Her instinct to record truth never wavered. Beckett's family, though shattered, finally had something more than silence. And yet, grief lingered. There were no graves to visit, no funerals to hold, just belongings returned in evidence bags, fragile echoes of lives cut short. Some families kept the items close. Others placed them in memory boxes, too painful to look at. For Maya Chen, the discovery was both torment and release. The journals confirmed what she had feared. Her friends had suffered, but they had fought to the very end. She visited the trailhead each October, leaving flowers, whispering apologies into the cold autumn air. I should have been there, she told herself, but in truth, nothing could have changed the forest's verdict. The story spread again through the media, though briefly. Headlines announced, Hunter finds evidence of missing students after 5 years. For the public, it was an eerie mystery resolved. For the families, it was a reminder that the forest had taken their children in silence and returned only fragments. Detective Reed closed the file with a single line that echoed Whitmore's years earlier. The Huron National Forest gave back their story, but not their remains. The Huron 5 walked into the woods with laughter, backpacks, and plans for a simple weekend. They never walked back out. For 5 years, their absence was a haunting silence. Families left without answers, friends caught between hope and grief. And then, a hunter's chance discovery revealed the truth. A campsite frozen in time, belongings scattered like whispers of a struggle against nature itself. The evidence painted a picture not of foul play, but of endurance. A broken leg, dwindling supplies, and a group of friends bound by loyalty. They stayed together when splitting up might have increased their chances. They rationed food, documented their ordeal, and in the end, they tried to carry each other home. Their courage was clear, but the wilderness was larger, older, and utterly indifferent. That's the unsettling part of this story. We like to believe we control our surroundings, that preparation and determination can overcome anything. Yet the forest doesn't bargain. It doesn't care about friendship or youth or the plans we make for the future. It simply exists, vast, silent, and unyielding. In its indifference, it can erase 5 bright lives as easily as it erases footprints after rain. Even now, years later, no remains have been found. Only objects, a camera, a notebook, a backpack, pieces of a story, but not its ending. The forest gave back their voices, but not their bodies. It allowed us to glimpse their struggle, but kept the rest hidden. And so the question lingers. Do you believe the forest claimed them? Or was there something more to the story? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If this story moved you, if you believe these mysteries deserve to be remembered, please take a moment to support this channel. Hit the like button, share this video with others, and subscribe so you don't miss the next case we uncover. Every story we tell carries the weight of lives that mattered, and together, we can make sure they're never forgotten. Until next time, remember, the wilderness holds many secrets. Some it gives back, others it never will.